My name is Elena Myers. I am 32 years old, a single mother raising my 8-year-old son Dylan in a quiet suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, spending most of my days hunched over a laptop while Dylan builds Lego cities on the living room floor. My life is simple, predictable, safe. At least, that's what I told myself. But some things in life have a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. I inherited something from my mother, a strange sensitivity, an ability I never understood. When I was a child, I sometimes touched people and felt flashes, small fragments of their memories. My mother called it a gift. My father called a curse. After my mother's death, I buried it deep, determined never to feel those flashes again. Until that day, it was a bright, punishingly hot July afternoon when I climbed the steps of St. Paul Regional Hospital, clutching a paper bag filled with fruit and a set of new pajamas for Dylan. He had been recovering from a routine appendectomy, and I had been told he would be discharged today. The sun baked the concrete steps, and by the time I reached the reception desk, the back of my blouse clung uncomfortably to my skin. "Good afternoon. I'm here to see Dylan Myers." He was in room 17. The woman behind the glass looked bored as she tapped at her keyboard. "Room 17 is being renovated," she said. "Your son's been moved. Check with the nurse on the second floor." That was odd. I had visited Dylan the night before, and everything had been perfectly normal. My stomach tightened, but I smiled politely and thanked her before heading upstairs. The second floor felt strangely deserted. The room where Dylan had been was empty. No bed, no charts, just a man measuring the walls for repainting. "Excuse me, do you know where the boy in this room was moved?" I asked. He shook his head. "No idea. I'm just the painter." I walked back into the hallway, scanning for anyone who could tell me where my son was. A young nurse finally appeared, pushing a cart of supplies. Her name tag read Olivia. "Excuse me, I'm looking for my son, Dylan Myers. He was moved from room 17. She checked her tablet. "Ah, yes. He's being prepared for discharge." They moved him to room 3 on the 3rd floor so the attending physician could sign off before release. I hesitated. "Room 3, 3rd floor?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, doctor's orders. Your things were already taken there." I thanked her and took the stairs up, but something about the way she rushed away left me unsettled. The 3rd floor felt different, quieter. The sign on the wall read, "Intensive Care Unit, authorized personnel only." That made no sense. Why would Dylan be in ICU? I spotted a man in scrubs wheeling equipment. "Where is room 3? I asked. He scratched his head. "Room 3? Down that hallway, but I'm new here. Best to double check." I followed the hallway until I saw a door propped slightly open, a faint beep of medical monitors echoing inside. My instincts told me something was off, but I stepped in anyway. The room was dim, filled with the antiseptic smell of disinfectant and something heavier, the weight of silence. Only one bed was occupied. On it lay a woman I had never seen before, middle-aged. Her silver-streaked hair spread across the pillow like a halo. Her skin was pale, her face calm, but there was something about her, something that felt familiar even though I couldn't place it. I should have left, but I didn't. Something drew me closer. My hand moved almost on its own until my fingertips brushed her palm. And then the world exploded. For an instant, I wasn't in a hospital. I was standing by a shimmering lake, watching sunlight bounce off its silver surface. A blue-painted house stood at the water's edge, with carved railings on a wide porch. A man leaned against the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, staring into the distance as if waiting for someone. The vision snapped away as fast as it came. I gasped and stumbled back, my pulse hammering. I hadn't had a flash like that in more than 20 years, and I had no idea why it had chosen this woman. "Excuse me." The voice startled me. I turned to see a man in a white coat standing in the doorway. His hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and his eyes carried that weary focus I'd only ever seen in trauma physicians. He glanced from me to the monitors, and then back, suspicion flashing in his face. "This is an intensive care unit," he said. "How did you even get in here?" I was told my son was moved here. I stammered. "Room 3. His brow furrowed. "There must have been a mix-up. This is a restricted area. No visitors allowed unless cleared by staff." I stepped back, embarrassed, my hand still tingling from where it had touched the patient's skin. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." He looked past me toward the bed. "What were you doing with her?" "I had just touched her hand," I admitted quietly. "I thought she might be alone." Something in his expression softened, but only slightly. He moved closer to check the monitors, adjusting one of the leads on the patient's chest. "Her name is Margaret Reynolds. We call her Maggie. She's been here 2 weeks, completely unresponsive." I blinked. "What happened to her?" "She was found near Silver Pines Lake during a thunderstorm. According to witnesses, she'd been out painting on an easel by the water. Lightning struck a tree near her. When the paramedics arrived, she was unconscious, no burns, no visible injuries, but no response either. Her vital signs are stable, brain activity present, but blocked somehow. Silver Pines Lake. The name sent a shiver down my spine. The lake in my vision had to be the same one. "Does she have family?" I asked. The doctor, his name tag read Dr. Michael Hargrove, shook his head. "We couldn't reach anyone. No ID on her at the time. Just paintbrushes and a satchel of art supplies. Police are still trying to piece together her life." I hesitated, then whispered. "I saw something when I touched her. A house, blue painted, right by the water." Dr. Hargrove straightened, his eyes narrowing. "You saw something?" I almost denied it, but something inside urged me to tell the truth. It felt like I was there, like it was her memory. The room grew quiet except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. The doctor studied me, a mix of skepticism and curiosity on his face. "Are you telling me you have some kind of intuition about patients?" "No," I said quickly, then paused. "At least not normally. It hasn't happened since I was a kid." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, whatever you think you saw, keep it to yourself outside this room. Families cling to hope. If you give them false hope, it can destroy them. Understand?" "I'm not trying to give false hope," I said softly. "But she doesn't feel gone. It's like she's lost somewhere between." For a long moment, he simply looked at me, as if trying to decide whether I was delusional or telling a truth too strange to ignore. Finally, he said, "If you notice anything unusual, come to me directly. No one else." He wrote something quickly on a chart, then stepped aside. "Your son isn't here. He's downstairs, room 32, a different wing. Someone gave you the wrong information." "Thank you," I murmured, still shaken. I glanced back at the woman on the bed, Margaret Reynolds. She looked peaceful, almost like she could wake at any moment if someone just called her name. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt drawn to her. As I left the room, one thought gnawed at me. That vision wasn't random. Something about her was reaching for me, or maybe I was reaching for her. That night, after Dylan had gone to bed, I sat on the porch of my father's house. The sky over St. Paul was clear, and the faint sound of cicadas hummed in the background. My father, Samuel Myers, sat across from me, carving a thin strip of leather into a shape only he could envision. He'd been a leather craftsman for decades, hands rough but steady, movements deliberate and patient. He looked up when he noticed I was staring off into the distance. "Something's on your mind," he said. I hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened at the hospital, but I'd never been able to hide much from my father. He had this way of waiting quietly, letting the silence do all the heavy lifting. "I touched someone today," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. a woman in a coma. And when I did, I saw things, memories that weren't mine. A house by a lake, a man in the doorway. It felt real, Dad. Too real. His knife paused mid-cut. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed and set the leather aside. So it's back. I frowned. What's back? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Your mother had the same thing. The sensitivity. She could touch people and see pieces of their lives. Sometimes even things that hadn't happened yet. She called it a blessing, but I called it a curse. It took a toll on her, Elena. She couldn't shut it off, and it wore her down. I swallowed hard. I remembered my mother as gentle but haunted, like she was always listening to something no one else could hear. You think I'm like her? I know you are, he said softly. You've always felt things too deeply. That's why I raised you to keep your hands to yourself when it came to strangers. I thought if you ignored it long enough, it would fade. I thought it had, I admitted. Until today. He studied me with those weathered gray eyes, the ones that had seen more loss than most people could endure. You don't have to do this, Elena. You don't owe that woman anything. You have Dylan to think about. Your life is finally steady. But that was the thing. Ever since I'd touched Margaret Reynolds' hand, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. The image of that blue house by the lake kept flashing in my mind, and that feeling like she wasn't gone, just trapped somewhere between memory and darkness. I can't ignore it, I said finally. What if she's trying to find her way back? What if I can help her? My father leaned back, rubbing his jaw. Your mother thought the same way. She tried to help too many people. And in the end, his voice trailed off, grief flickering behind his eyes. I reached over and took his hand. I'm not Mom, Dad. I'm not going to let this destroy me. But if I can use it to help someone, shouldn't I try? He looked at me for a long time, then squeezed my hand. Just promise me one thing. Don't lose yourself in it. Help her if you must, but remember, you have a son who needs you in the here and now. I promise. For the first time in years, I felt the stir of something I thought I'd buried long ago. Not just the gift, but purpose. I didn't know what Margaret Reynolds meant to me, or why I'd been drawn to her. But I knew I couldn't just walk away. And deep down, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I woke before dawn the next morning, long before Dylan's alarm clock would chime. Sleep had been shallow and restless, filled with fragmented flashes of that house by the lake. I had seen every detail in my dream. The blue paint, the carved porch railings, even the weathered mailbox leaning slightly to one side. When I opened my eyes, I knew exactly where I needed to go. Mom, why are we up so early? Dylan mumbled as I packed his backpack with snacks and water. We're taking a little trip, I said gently. I need to check on something for work. It wasn't entirely true, but explaining psychic visions to an 8-year-old before breakfast felt like the wrong choice. By mid-morning, our car rolled along a winding rural road that hugged the curves of Silver Pines Lake. The water shimmered under the bright July sun, dotted with fishermen and the occasional kayaker gliding across its glassy surface. Dylan pressed his face to the window, wide-eyed. Whoa, can we go swimming later? Maybe, I said, though my focus was fixed on the GPS marker. When we finally pulled onto Lakeside Drive, I saw it, the exact house from my vision. 2 stories, pale blue paint with white trim, and that same carved porch railing curling like vines around the posts. My breath caught in my throat. Dylan whispered, Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I murmured. Before I could knock on the door, it opened. A man stepped out, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with dark hair tousled from sleep and a face shadowed by stubble. His eyes were tired, suspicious, and a little guarded. Can I help you? His voice was deep, carrying the kind of edge people get when life has been pressing too hard for too long. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how strange this must look. A woman showing up unannounced with a kid in tow. Are you? Ethan Reynolds. His brow furrowed. Yeah. Who's asking? My name is Elena Myers. Yesterday, I was at St. Paul Regional Hospital in the ICU. Your mother, Margaret Reynolds, she's there. Ethan froze, his hands tightening on the porch railing. My mom? Are you sure? I nodded. She was brought in 2 weeks ago, unresponsive after a lightning strike near this lake. Color drained from his face. He stepped back, shaking his head like he couldn't process the words. I thought she was out of town visiting a friend. When she didn't answer my calls, I assumed. I don't know what I assumed. Why didn't the hospital call me? They didn't have her ID when she was admitted, I said gently. No phone, no wallet. They've been listing her as unidentified. He swore under his breath, gripping his hair. I filed a missing persons report last week, and nobody told me she was lying in a hospital bed this whole time. The pain in his voice cut deep. I stepped forward, slightly, lowering my voice. She's alive, Ethan. Stable. And I think she's trying to come back. I know how this sounds, but when I touched her hand, I saw her memories. I saw this house. He stared at me, disbelief flickering in his eyes, but something softer too, a glimmer of hope he didn't dare trust yet. You, what, had a vision? I nodded once. I can't explain it, but I know she's reaching for something familiar. For home. For you. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was Dylan shifting nervously behind me, whispering, Mom, is he okay? Ethan exhaled sharply and looked away, blinking hard. I'm okay, kid. Just shocked. He finally met my eyes again. Take me to her. Please. Within an hour, Ethan sat silently in the passenger seat while Dylan hummed quietly in the back. His hands stayed clenched, knuckles white, and I could feel the storm of emotions rolling off him. Fear, guilt, hope, disbelief. You said she's stable, he finally asked. Yes. No physical injuries. But she hasn't woken up yet. He nodded slowly. Mom always did crazy things when storms rolled in. She said she could feel energy in the air, like it whispered to her brushes. I told her she'd get herself hurt one day. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Guess I was right. When we reached the hospital, Ethan hesitated at the ICU door, bracing himself like a man about to face his own judgment. I touched his arm lightly. She's still your mother, Ethan. Whatever happens next, she's fighting. I can feel it. He swallowed hard and nodded. Let's go. The ICU felt colder that day, like the air conditioning had been turned up too high. Ethan paused in the doorway, staring at his mother as if he didn't quite believe she was real. She lay still, her silver-streaked hair fanned over the pillow, her hands pale and unmoving against the white sheets. Mom, his voice cracked. He stepped closer, but stopped short, almost afraid to touch her. Dr. Hargrove appeared behind us, scanning his clipboard. You must be her son. Ethan nodded stiffly. Ethan Reynolds. The doctor offered a hand, but kept his tone clinical. Your mother's vitals are good, but she hasn't regained consciousness. No physical damage we can find, but her neural pathways aren't responding as expected. It's unusual. Unusual. Ethan repeated, his jaw tightening. The doctor hesitated. She's not brain dead and there's no trauma, but it's as if her mind is elsewhere. Trapped. He glanced at me, which brings us back to you, Ms. Myers. Yesterday, after you touched her hand, we recorded the first fluctuation in her neural activity in over 2 weeks. Small, but measurable. Ethan turned sharply to me. What does that mean? I hesitated, feeling suddenly exposed under their eyes. It means when I touched her, I saw something, a memory, and her body reacted. Dr. Hargrove folded his arms. We can explain it, but I'd like to see if it happens again, under supervision this time. Ethan looked at me with skepticism and hope battling for control. If you think it can help, I took a slow breath and nodded. I'll try. The room went quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. I stepped closer to the bed, my fingertips trembling slightly. Hi, Margaret, I whispered, though she couldn't respond. It's me again, Elena. I reached for her hand, warm but limp, and let my fingers wrap gently around hers. And then everything changed. Suddenly, I was standing in a sunlit yard. A little girl with honey-colored hair swung her legs from the porch steps, clutching a wooden horse carved from pale birch. A man knelt in front of her, tall, broad, his hands stained with sawdust. She squealed with delight, throwing her arms around his neck, whispering thank you over and over. The scene dissolved like smoke. Now she was 12, clutching a sketchbook at summer camp, her voice soft and uncertain as she explained her drawings. The other kids laughed behind her, teasing her for her small-town accent, but one camp counselor knelt, pointing at her sketches. You have talent, Margaret, real talent. The kindness wrapped around her like sunlight after rain. The vision shifted again. Rain fell on a summer evening, blurring streetlights into watercolor streaks. Margaret, now a teenager, stood under a chestnut tree with a boy who wrapped his jacket over her shoulders. He whispered something, and she laughed through tears as he kissed her. First love, fragile and sweet, filling the air with a thrill of possibility. A wedding followed, small, quiet, intimate. The man she married wasn't the boy under the tree, but someone else, gentle, serious, but eventually distant. A baby's cry echoed, pulling focus to a tiny boy with Ethan's eyes. Margaret smiled through exhaustion, rocking him in a small apartment that smelled faintly of formula and turpentine. Years sped forward. The apartment was replaced by a cramped studio filled with canvases. Margaret painted late into the night, hands moving with fierce precision as she captured storm clouds rolling over a lake. Bills stacked on a side table, but she didn't stop painting, or kept her breathing when life pressed too hard. The visions came faster now, fragments blurring together. Ethan's first steps, her first solo exhibition, quiet evenings alone, phone calls that ended in tears. A woman who gave everything she had to her child and to her art, even when the world gave her little in return. I gasped, the visions fading like a tide pulling back to sea. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the ICU. A single tear rolled down Margaret's temple, and her fingers twitched faintly in my grip. Ethan made a strangled sound. Did you see that? She moved. Dr. Hargrove leaned in, eyes wide. Motor response. First time since admission. He glanced at the monitor. Neural activity spiking again. I gently squeezed her hand. Margaret, you're safe. Your son is here. You're not alone. Her lips trembled, a sound escaping like a faint sigh. Ethan's eyes welled up, his knuckles white as he gripped the bed rail. Mom, it's me. It's Ethan. I'm right here. For a heartbeat, I thought she might wake fully, but then her body relaxed again, slipping back into stillness. She's in there, I whispered, my own voice shaking. She's fighting. Ethan turned to me, his face a mix of awe and confusion. What exactly are you doing? How do you know all that about her life? I hesitated, unsure how to explain decades of secrecy in a single sentence. When I touch people, sometimes I see pieces of their memories. I thought it was gone, but apparently not. Ethan studied me like I was speaking another language. Finally, he said, whatever it is, don't stop. If it helps her, I don't care how strange it is. Dr. Hargrove nodded slowly. We'll document this. But one thing is clear. She responds to you, Ms. Myers. You might be her only link back right now. I looked down at Margaret again, her still hand in mine. For the first time in years, I felt the stir of purpose, sharp and undeniable. This woman's life had played across my mind like a silent film, and I couldn't walk away. 3 days after the second session, everything changed. I was sitting by Margaret's bedside, holding her hand like I'd done every day since that first vision, when I felt it, a faint squeeze. My head shot up, and for a second I thought I'd imagined it, but then her eyelids fluttered. Margaret. My voice cracked. It's Elena. Can you hear me? Her lips parted, and a whisper of sound escaped. Who? Ethan was already in the room before I could call him. Mom? Oh my God, Mom, you're awake. His voice trembled, joy and relief spilling into every word. Margaret blinked slowly, her gaze sliding toward him. I don't know you. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Ethan froze, gripping the side of the bed. Mom, it's me. Ethan. Your son. Her brow furrowed, eyes darting nervously between us. I don't remember. Dr. Hargrove arrived within minutes, checking her vitals while asking simple orientation questions. She knew her name, knew the month and year, but when asked about family, her face went blank. It was as if the memories were there, but locked behind an unbreakable door. Retrograde amnesia is common after traumatic coma, Dr. Hargrove explained gently to Ethan. It might be temporary or partial, or sometimes it never fully resolves. Ethan stepped back, shoulders stiff, fighting emotions I could almost feel radiating from him. So she doesn't know me, her own son? The doctor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Give it time. Familiar environments often help. Take her home. Surround her with the life she built. That's how we ended up moving into Margaret's house by Silver Pines Lake. Ethan had been living alone there since she'd disappeared. But after the hospital released her into his care, he asked if Dylan and I could stay for a while, just until she stabilized. She trusts you, he said quietly. You're the only one she responds to. I hesitated, but something about Margaret's eyes when she looked at me, a mix of confusion and faint recognition, made me say yes. The first night in that house felt surreal. The same blue walls from my vision glowed faintly under the porch light as we carried our bags inside. Dylan darted up the stairs, wide-eyed at the idea of staying in a real lake house. Ethan gave him a faint smile but said little, his focus always drifting back to his mother. Margaret sat in the living room, hands folded neatly in her lap, staring at a painting of the lake during a thunderstorm. I made this, didn't I? She asked softly when she caught me watching her. I nodded. Yes, you did. She traced the edge of the frame with her fingertips. It feels like looking through someone else's eyes. That night, after Dylan was asleep, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table. He rubbed his face with both hands, the weight of exhaustion pulling at his posture. She doesn't even call me by name. She just looks at me like I'm a stranger. She's not rejecting you, I said softly. Her mind is protecting itself. Memories tied to the strongest emotions sometimes take the longest to come back. You're too important to her. His eyes met mine, tired but searching. You sound like you know what you're talking about. I hesitated, then admitted. I see pieces of her life when I touch her. I know she loves you, Ethan. I've seen it. You were her whole world. For a moment, his defenses cracked, and something tender slipped through. Hope, raw and unsteady. Then we fight for it, whatever it takes. Over the next week, we fell into a rhythm. Each morning, I worked remotely from the porch while Dylan explored the lakeshore with an old fishing pole Ethan found in the shed. Margaret would wander the house like someone visiting a museum of her own life, pausing at old family photos, touching objects with cautious curiosity. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she simply stared at her own artwork, murmuring, "These are beautiful. Did I really make them?" And every afternoon I sat with her, gently holding her hand, telling her stories I'd pulled from the visions. The wooden horse her father carved, the counselor who encouraged her art, the night she met Misha under the chestnut tree, the day she brought Ethan home from the hospital. One evening, she surprised us all. We were having dinner. Roast chicken Ethan had ordered from the local deli when she looked at him suddenly and said, "You like your coffee black, always have." Ethan froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Yeah, I do." She blinked rapidly, pressing a hand to her forehead. It just came to me, like a spark. It was small, but it was a start. Later that night, while Dylan slept and Margaret rested, Ethan and I sat on the porch watching the lake ripple under moonlight. "She's getting pieces back," I said, hugging my knees. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but what if she never remembers me completely? What if this is all we get?" I turned to face him. "Then you build new memories. You love her through this. She'll feel it, even if she can't name it." He looked at me then, not just looked, but really saw me, like someone seeing past their own pain for the first time in weeks. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I have to." The silence between us stretched, comfortable this time, filled with the quiet chirp of crickets and the soft slap of water on the dock. For the first time since this began, I felt a fragile sense of home forming, not just for Margaret, but for all of us. And deep inside, a quiet thought stirred. Maybe this strange gift of mine wasn't a curse after all. Maybe it had brought me exactly where I needed to be. It happened on a cool Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Margaret had come home. The lake was still and glassy, mist curling off its surface like silk. Dylan was on the dock, fishing pole in hand, while Ethan worked on a loose shutter by the porch. I was making coffee when I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in a simple cream sweater and jeans. Her eyes held a focus I hadn't seen before, like she was following an invisible thread pulling her forward. "Elena," she said softly, "can you show me the room upstairs? The one with the big window." For a moment, I didn't know what she meant. Then it hit me, the art studio. The one Ethan had kept closed since her accident, saying it felt wrong to open it without her. "Of course," I said, setting down my mug. Ethan noticed us heading upstairs and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Mom, are you sure you want to go in there?" His voice carried both hope and fear. "Yes," Margaret replied. "I think. I need to." The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and I pushed the door open. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, catching particles of dust that danced like tiny stars. The smell of old oil paint and wood instantly filled the air. Margaret stepped inside, her hands trembling as she touched the edge of a wooden easel. She stared at an unfinished canvas sitting there, the storm painting she'd been working on the day she disappeared. The bold strokes of gray and deep blue were frozen mid-chaos, as if waiting for her return. She reached for a brush, paused, then slowly lowered her hand. "It feels familiar," she whispered, "but it's like looking at someone else's life." I walked closer, gently resting my hand on her shoulder. "It's yours, Margaret. You lived it. You love this place." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "Can you help me remember?" I hesitated. Touching her again meant opening myself to whatever fragments of her life were still locked away. But I couldn't say no. I took her hand, warm and fragile, and let the energy flow. Instantly, my mind filled with color. I saw her as a little girl again, painting stick figures on scrap cardboard while her father built wooden toys beside her. I felt her teenage pride holding her first set of real brushes, a gift from her summer camp counselor. Then came flashes of art school, paint under her nails and coffee-fueled nights over blank canvases. The visions shifted, and I saw the day she brought baby Ethan into this very room, holding him in one arm while painting with the other. She whispered to him, "Someday you'll understand why I need this." Another flash, a fight with her ex-husband, his voice sharp, accusing her of choosing paint over family. She stood her ground, even with tears streaking her face. "Art is how I breathe," she'd said. I felt the pain of loss when she was left alone, the fierce determination to keep going, the pride when her first gallery show sold out, and the quiet nights when she painted storms as if they could carry away all the loneliness she never spoke aloud. When I pulled back, Margaret was crying quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I remember pieces," she whispered. "This room. This is where I survived." Ethan, who had been standing at the doorway, stepped inside slowly. "Mom, do you remember me?" At all. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Her brows furrowed, and then something shifted. You were here once. A little boy, sitting on the floor with crayons while I painted. She pressed a hand to her chest. And you laughed when I got paint on my nose. Ethan froze, his breath catching. Yeah, I did that. Her voice trembled. You called me the storm catcher. Said I painted storms better than anyone else. A sob broke from him as he closed the space between them, gently pulling her into an embrace. That's because you do, Mom. You always did. For the first time, Margaret hugged him back, her arms tentative but real. I still don't have it all, but you feel familiar. Safe. That night, she asked for brushes. She stood at the easel again, the unfinished storm painting before her. Her movements were slow at first, uncertain, but then her strokes became deliberate, confident. The storm took shape, darker and deeper than before, but with a ray of light breaking through the clouds, a detail that hadn't been there when she'd last touched the canvas. We watched in silence as she worked, the rhythmic scratch of bristles on canvas filling the room like a heartbeat. When she finally stepped back, she whispered, This feels like me. And for the first time since she'd woken, Margaret smiled. Not the polite, confused smile she'd worn for weeks, but something true, glowing with recognition and quiet joy. Ethan turned to me, his eyes shimmering. You did this, he said softly. No, I corrected gently, watching Margaret set down her brush with steady hands. She did it. I just reminded her of who she already was. From that day, Margaret's recovery accelerated. Her memory didn't return overnight, but the fear in her eyes softened, replaced by curiosity and a growing confidence. The house felt alive again, full of laughter, paint, and late-night coffee runs. Dylan started calling her Grandma Maggie, and she didn't correct him. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. A strange, patchwork family stitched together by love, patience, and the stubborn belief that even broken memories could be mended. Autumn came early that year. The trees around Silver Pines Lake burned with shades of amber and crimson, their reflection rippling across the still water like fire in motion. Life in the Reynolds house had found a rhythm, quiet, steady, and full of small moments that stitched us closer together. Margaret painted almost every day now. At first, her sessions were short, cautious, like a pianist relearning the keys. But then something clicked, and she threw herself into it, sometimes painting until her hands cramped. The canvases she produced were different, less storm, more light. Ethan noticed too. She's painting hope now, he whispered one evening as we watched her work. Not just survival. Her memory was still spotty, but little flashes came at the oddest times. One afternoon, she saw Dylan playing by the dock, holding up a fish proudly, and suddenly blurted, Ethan, remember when you brought me that catfish the size of your leg and swore you caught it all by yourself? Ethan froze mid-step, then laughed so hard he nearly doubled over. I was 8. Uncle Jim caught it, but I remember. His eyes glistened when he turned back to her. You remember that too? Margaret looked uncertain. I think so. It feels like mine, even if I can't see all of it yet. That night, she sat at the kitchen table sketching from memory. The image was of Ethan, age 8, holding a catfish with a grin, so wide it looked like it might split his face. Her hands trembled as she sketched, tears smudging the pencil lines. It's coming back, she whispered, piece by piece. A week later, we had a breakthrough I hadn't expected. Margaret had been restless all morning, pacing between the studio and the living room. Finally, she turned to me and said, Elena, can you do it again? The way you did in the hospital. When you touched me and I saw things. My chest tightened. I'd been careful with that gift, afraid of what it might stir in me as much as in her. But she looked at me with such pleading eyes, I couldn't refuse. Okay, I said softly. Sit down, take a breath. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she held them out to me. The moment our palms touched, I let go. Memories slammed into me like a floodgate bursting. Her first apartment after the divorce. Tiny but full of plants and unfinished canvases. Ethan as a little boy, lying on the floor with coloring books, telling her she was better than superheroes because she made whole worlds out of colors. The two of them baking a lopsided birthday cake, laughing as flour dusted the counters like snow. And then darker memories crept in. The fear of losing the house after a bad season of art sales. The loneliness that curled around her at night when Ethan left for college. The grief she'd never voiced when her marriage ended for good. But interwoven with all of it was love, so much love it made my throat ache. When I pulled away, Margaret was crying but smiling. I remember all of that. Every single thing. She touched her temple, trembling. And I remember you, Ethan. Your first day of school, your graduation, the way you held my hand when Dad died. Ethan, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway, stumbled forward and dropped to his knees beside her. Mom, you really remember? She cupped his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're my son, my everything. How could I ever forget you? He pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never wanted to let go. I stepped back, giving them space, my own eyes stinging. After that day, something shifted in the house. Margaret moved through each room like she was reintroducing herself to her own life, rediscovering things she'd once loved. An old music box in the bedroom, a stack of letters from her art school friends, even a cookbook stained with decades of family recipes. One evening, she made Ethan his childhood favorite. Chicken pot pie with the flaky crust she'd perfected when money was tight and comfort was needed. Dylan watched from the table, wide-eyed. This is better than any restaurant, he announced proudly. Margaret chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. You can thank your Grandma Maggie for that one, Ethan said with a grin. She paused, looking at Dylan with soft eyes. Grandma Maggie, I like that. Life outside the house slowly began to notice too. Margaret's work, now bursting with vibrant colors and warmth, caught the eye of a local gallery owner. She hesitated at first, nervous about stepping back into public life, but Ethan encouraged her. People should see what you've done, Mom. You've changed, and your art shows it. The gallery opening was small but intimate, and Margaret's smile that night lit up the room. She stood in front of her storm painting, the one she'd finished after coming home, now framed and glowing under the gallery lights. People stopped, studied it, and whispered about its raw emotion and surprising hopefulness. When someone asked what inspired it, Margaret looked across the room at Ethan, then at me and Dylan. Family, she said simply. The one you're given and the one you find. Later that night, back at the house, we sat on the porch, sipping cocoa while Dylan dozed in a blanket on a porch swing. The lake reflected the stars like shards of glass scattered across black velvet. You know, Ethan said quietly, when you showed up at our door that day, I thought you were some kind of, I don't know, miracle worker or a scam artist. I laughed softly. Fair reaction. But you gave me back my mom. He turned to me, eyes soft, sincere. And somehow you gave me back a piece of myself, too. Margaret, sitting beside us, reached over and took both our hands. We're a family now, aren't we? Not just because of blood, but because we choose to be. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, deeper than gratitude, steadier than luck. For the first time in years, I wasn't just passing through life. I was part of something rooted, something alive. The first snow of the season fell quietly over Silver Pines Lake, turning the water's edge into a soft blur of white and silver. It had been 3 months since Margaret had fully regained her memory, and the house no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a home. Inside, the fireplace crackled, filling the living room with warmth and the scent of pine. Dylan sat cross-legged on the rug, working on a school project while Margaret painted in her studio upstairs, humming softly to herself. Ethan and I were in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. It felt almost domestic, almost ordinary. And that in itself was a miracle. "You know," Ethan said quietly as he chopped vegetables, "I used to hate this house." I looked up, surprised. "Hate it? Why?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Too many ghosts. Too many reminders of how lonely Mom had gotten. How much I'd missed while building my own life somewhere else." But now he paused, knife stilling mid-slice. "Now it feels different. Because of you. Because you stayed." I smiled, faintly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "I didn't stay for me. I stayed for all of you, and maybe a little for me too." Ethan's eyes lifted to meet mine, and something unspoken passed between us. A softness, a possibility neither of us had been ready to acknowledge before. Upstairs, Margaret finished her painting and called us to join her. When we stepped into the studio, I froze. It wasn't another storm or lake landscape. It was us, all of us. Dylan holding a fishing rod, grinning proudly. Ethan leaning against the porch railing, relaxed and at peace. Margaret herself at the easel, and me sitting on the steps, sunlight falling across my face. It wasn't just a painting, it was a statement. This is my life now. This is my family. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Margaret smiled, her hand steady as she set down her brush. I wanted to capture what saved me, what brought me back. She looked at me with gratitude, so deep it felt like a physical weight. "You gave me more than memories, Elena. You gave me a future." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "You gave yourself that, Margaret. I just held your hand." She stepped forward and hugged me tightly, something she hadn't done even when her memory first returned. "You were the thread that stitched me back together. I'll never forget that." Later that evening, after Dylan went to bed, we sat by the fire with mugs of hot cocoa. The conversation drifted to plans for the holidays, who would host Thanksgiving, what kind of tree to get for Christmas. It was Margaret who said it first. "Elena, what are you going to do after this? After I'm back to normal?" The question caught me off guard. For weeks, I'd been avoiding thinking about it. My old life, the one before Silver Pines, was still there waiting. But it felt hollow now, compared to what we had built here. "I don't know," I admitted softly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel settled. Like I belong somewhere." Ethan set down his mug. "Then stay. You and Dylan. Stay here with us." My head snapped toward him. "Ethan!" He held my gaze, his voice steady. "This isn't just about gratitude. This is about us. About building something real." Margaret smiled knowingly but didn't interfere. She simply sipped her cocoa, her eyes twinkling like someone who had already seen the ending of a story she loved. I felt a lump in my throat. "You mean that?" Ethan nodded. "I mean every word." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest I'd ever known. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in years, Margaret cooked her famous pot pie, laughing as Dylan and Ethan made a mess peeling potatoes. Christmas followed with snowball fights by the lake, a tree decorated with mismatched ornaments, and Margaret gifting each of us a small framed painting she'd made, a memory from this new life we'd built together. But the true moment of healing came one evening in January, when Margaret took me by the hand and led me to her studio. On the easel was a new canvas, a young girl holding the hand of an older woman, standing at the edge of a lake as storm clouds parted to reveal sunlight. "That's you and me," Margaret said softly. "The day you brought me back." I stared at it, unable to speak. "This gift you have," she continued. "It's not a curse, Elena. It's connection. And sometimes that's what people need most, to know someone sees them even when they're lost." For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of what I could do. I felt proud. Spring came early. The ice melted from the lake, and life settled into a rhythm that felt permanent. Margaret's work began selling at galleries again. Dylan thrived at his new school, and Ethan and I, well, we finally admitted what had been growing between us all along. One evening, we stood by the dock, watching the sunset bleed into the water. Ethan reached for my hand. So this is home now. I smiled, leaning against him. Yeah, this is home. Behind us, Margaret called out from the porch, holding up another painting. Hey, who wants to see my newest masterpiece? Dylan came running, shouting, Me! Me! And the three of us walked back together, hand in hand. As I look back now, I realize everything began with one accidental touch in a hospital room. A touch that opened not just Margaret's memories, but my own heart to healing, to belonging, to love. And sometimes that's all it takes. One touch to change everything.